say, this sort of, if you talk about the relationship that you have with yourself, it's kind of seen as this sort of really sad little consolation prize, when in actual fact, we are the one and only person that we are with throughout the entirety of our life. I'm really passionate about the idea of really fucking owning being alone. And the reason I use the word spinsterhood in the title of this podcast is because I feel like it's something that we need to really flip on its head. And people need to realize that actually spinsters, quote unquote, are not these kind of sad, lonely, desperate women who are kind of, you know, their one and only mission in life is to get another partner. And I find that really, really frustrating. And actually, I personally think that there is nothing more attractive than a person who is just owning who they are for no other reason than they are just fucking owning it. They're not getting that power and that confidence through anyone else. When that confidence comes from within you, there is nothing more attractive than that. What would you say to that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, because so one of the things that you know, I think that I speak about in both books, and particularly speak about in the second book, is that we really do, it's like we put this focus on like, all right, your family is supposed to like be the one who loves you. What your family thinks of you means everything. It means whether or not you're worthy. And then we just shoot them straight into partnerships. Like now all that matters is that someone chose you romantically. All that matters is this. Are you kidding me? Like, we're basing our entire, and also like friendships are totally eclipsed. Friendships don't matter. Friendships are just, you know, friendships are seen as just like, yeah, until you got a husband. And it's like, what the hell? Like, this is not how this should be. Like, you have to have that anchor of yourself. And then, you know, what I want to see, and so much of why I wanted to write this as a sort of follow-up book, is that we need to have our relationship with ourselves, and then broaden it into a community, not a group of people who are like choosing you and deciding your worth, but like, we should, like, my ideal is to have a community, particularly of people, of women who have chosen themselves, cultivated relationships with themselves, and then we come together as this like wonderful group of people. Like, I don't see my friends the way that the world has like taught us to view ourselves. Like, there's none of my friends, particularly because we know this does affect women so much more, and women are socialized so differently in this way. I don't see any of my friends as like, oh, why hasn't some man come along and chosen her yet? I'm like, that friend of mine is rad. If she never gets married, who cares? Good for her. Who even deserves her? I'm not sure. Like,
Right.
I don't view it that way, because I
Yeah.
think so many of us are raising our awareness, are raising our consciousness that like what we were told is bullshit. And I think so it's interesting, because one of the things that I talk about in You Will Find Your People is that if you have your people, you're less likely to settle. You're less likely to settle with a crappy partner,
Yeah.
because you have that feeling within yourself that like, I'm enough. You have your group of friends who are all like, yes, of course you're enough, and I am also enough. To have that community of like people who are reminding you of who you are. And I think that, to me, what about that is like, you know, to use this word, is spinsterdom. Well, what about that is a negative version of spinsterdom? What about that is
Yeah.
negative? And also, how is that any different from what men do? They cultivate relationships with themselves. They have their group of bros or whatever. Women can come and go. It doesn't matter. Like, why have we relegated that to one gender? It's wild and
Yeah.
misogynist, but you know.
Totally. Do you know, I mean, obviously we're starting to talk about how to find your people, and let me just say before we properly talk about it, I was so excited when I heard that you were writing a book called How to Find Your People. But there are so many things that I'm excited about, but I don't think friendships and their dynamics are necessarily talked about that much. And I think it's so relevant to this podcast, because I know from my own experience, like I was just saying, that it's really important to have friends who are on the same journey as you.
Yeah.
But one thing I have found is that I think it can actually be really quite difficult and sometimes really quite awkward and kind of cringe to make new friends as an adult.
Women are at least more geared toward that kind of intimacy and friendship, whereas like male friendship is like very surface level. Like they don't do it, you know, by and large, in the broadest strokes of that. But so that is two things that you just mentioned are entire chapters. One in the book, which one is how awkward it is to make friends as an adult. And I've heard people say that it's not. They're like, it's easy. And I'm like, well, good for you. It's not at all. And I don't know what you're talking about. Like, congratulations on your ease. I just don't feel like that's relatable to me. And I don't know. I just always kind of hate when people are like, this is easy. Everyone who has a hard time with it is doing it wrong. And I'm like, why is that statement necessary? Like, why would you make such a, a statement like that? But and then the second part of what you said that there's also a chapter about is long distance friends that you meet online and stuff like that. Like we talk about that, like that's doesn't count and that's silly and it's irrelevant. It is not. Like increasingly, and throughout my whole life, honestly, I met so many friends that way. Again, maybe because I was, living a different life than a lot of people. I've always met friends that way. And so when people are like, I'm starting to do this crazy thing, and I'm like, I've been doing that since I was like 13, but okay. When people are just like, isn't this weird? I'm like, no, it's not weird. Like, you find your people wherever you find them, and you thank God that you did. So it's really important to me with this book, and even just, things I write on social media, to destigmatize how you meet your friends or when you meet your friends. Are you kidding me? Like, I think it's just, I've realized in my life, it's so boring and reductive to think that everybody gets the same things and everyone gets them at the same time. And if not, you've done something wrong. Like, we're all unique human beings on a specific path in our lifetime. It's not going to look the same for everybody. Why are we telling people it has to? That's so boring. Like, so, and why not honor that? Yeah, for some people, it's really awkward. Like, some of us are introverts. Some of us have brains that work differently. Some of us have been hurt a lot. Some of us have been through trauma with friends. Like, to say that it's easy for everybody is just so boring. And again, one of the reasons I wanted to write this book, because to even talk about it, when I started writing it again, I was like, oh, great. I'm writing another book about this thing that's like so hard to talk about. But again, realizing like, okay, I guess I am the person to do this, because I've always been someone who, I don't like not talking about things like this. I don't like the idea of like, oh, we never speak of that. Shh, don't talk about that. Like, why? If we're all secretly feeling it, the only way to release shame is to share that information, is to commune with each other. And so it is awkward to make friends. It's really awkward. There's the potential for rejection. It's so similar. And I talk about this in the book as well. It's so similar to the vulnerability and intimacy of romantic relationships. And we should talk about it as such,
Yeah. Gosh, there's so many things I want to ask you about this, because, but before I forget, actually, one thing that I want to ask if you do address in the book, and I'm sure you do, and this really sort of, it speaks to me because of something that's recently happened in my life. Yeah. Basically, do you talk about friendship breakups?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I assumed you would, because the reason I ask you this is because I have relatively recently, someone is no longer in my life who was in my life for a very, very long time. But I had realized over the years that this person had actually been an incredibly toxic influence in my life for forever. And it's amazing that I feel this huge relief that they're no longer in my life. But I think friendship breakups are something that are so incredibly difficult to talk about. It really is. It's almost, it's way more difficult than talking about like a relationship breakup. The breakup of a friendship that can be incredibly painful, but so complex. Tell me about what have you how have you talked about that in the book?
Yeah, so I talk about it in several ways. There really were, if I had sat down, I could have written about probably, I don't know, 50 relationship breakups and things like that. And it's interesting because when I first started writing the book, I wanted to talk about friendship breakups in uh I wanted to talk about like a specific friendship breakup or things like that. And then I realized that I actually didn't want to talk too much and get too into the nitty-gritty of particular friendship breakups, because when you start writing about them, it's so easy for, even unintentionally, for it to sound like, and they did everything wrong and sucked and I was right. And that was not interesting to me. So I was like, I made a conscious choice to be like, look, I could talk about these, but I'm not trying to rake this person over the coals. I'm not trying to say, see how bad they were. I don't need to do that. That's not the point. So what I did instead was to talk about when to know if what's going on in your relationship is a warning sign, if it's something that can be worked through, how to work through it, how to attempt to repair it, when to stop trying to repair it, and then when to realize you might just have to break up with them, how to potentially do
Yeah,
that, how
right.
to deal with friendship breakup grief after that, just all of these different things that are so much more interesting and nuanced to me
Yeah.
than telling a story about like, yeah, we broke up and they suck. Like, that was not interesting to me. Um I think that was one of those moments that, you realize, and it's not always easy to get there, because there is some part of you that's just like, oh, they sucked so much. This was so painful. But I think it was a real moment of like growth and clarity for me to be able to step away from that and be like, you know what? Sometimes whose fault it is irrelevant. The fact is, like, this was not making you happy. Maybe it was not making either one of you happy. So what do you do with that grief? What do you do with that pain? And I think that's really the essence of it. And then what do you do with the stigma of like, this isn't supposed to happen,
Mm.
and we're not supposed to talk about this, and just all that stuff, because, you know, and
Yeah.
it doesn't necessarily stop. Like, you're probably going to go through another couple of friends. You might, not probably, but you might go through another couple friendship breakups again before you die. Like, I wish I could say like that only happens at 18. It's like, no, this might be something that you're going to need to know for the rest of your life.
Yeah, absolutely. Apologies for my cat that's just jumped up on the back of the chair.
Oh,
Sorry.
that's okay. Hi.
This is Johnny. Sorry, I'll put him back down. Lane, let me ask, and again, it's probably really annoying when someone says, okay, so well, you're writing this book about friendship and you write a chapter about, or you write about friendship breakups, and how can someone deal with a friendship breakup? Or basically what I'm trying to say is I realize that there are so many nuances, but if you could say anything to anyone listening who is in a friendship that they realize is no longer serving them and actually is not a good influence in their life, and actually they don't really want that person in their life, but it's so difficult. Like,
I know.
how the fuck do you break up with a friend?
I mean, there's so many different ways I could answer that, because it's like, are you asking about like how you specifically do it, how you navigate those emotions? Like, you know what I mean? There's so many questions.
That's it, and that's exactly, yeah, and that's exactly why I sort of preempted that by saying I know this is
Yeah,
just like a really annoying question, because, well, okay, here's a more specific question. If
sure.
you So, for example, if you really don't want somebody in your life anymore, my first question actually is, should you be honest with them and speak to them about it? Because rather than kind of phasing them out of your life, I mean, God knows how you do that.
I
It's
know.
really, it's so true. I mean, honestly, this conversation it's friendships are just as much of a minefield as relationships, aren't they? Let's face it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so I always love, I've really been loving when I talk to people about this book and they bring up things that are like specifically right there in the book. And that is one of the things where it's like, well, how do you know? Do you talk to them or do you phase it out? And I kind of, parse through that. Because that is always what I go through too, where I'm like, do I tell them I'm getting out of here? I gotta go. Or do you just like kind of sneak out and pack your bags, right? And I think so. The thing that I really focus on in this book is I really encourage people as much as possible to communicate as much as they feel comfortable with. And I say that because like, it depends what kind of person you are, right? Like some people really hate confrontation, really hate talking about it, won't even give the other person a chance to make it right and just need to leave. I'm not that type of person. Um, I think I have been maybe at different points in my past. I'm not sure, probably not. I'm just not really wired that way. But for people like that, I would encourage them to communicate more. I would encourage them to see if there's something that can work on, because I know it is really painful. And I've been on the other side of this where someone just like bails and you're like, I don't even think I did anything wrong. What's
Yeah.
going on?
It's
And so I
painful,
talk
isn't it?
about that as a whole thing, right? But if you're wired like me, I am wired in the more people pleasing, overly forgiving, overly empathetic. Like I'm sure they're just going through a time. It doesn't matter that they're treating me like absolute garbage and have been pretty much since I met them. If you're that type of person, I don't encourage continuing to communicate because you probably already done it a million times. Like in my situations where I've left a friend, sometimes the only way to do it is to phase them out, because let's be real, if you're wired that way, you're not communicating with them to like tell them you're leaving. You're communicating with them, telling them you're leaving and hoping they'll like magically change and convince you to stay. And that's not healthy.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
so I think that so much of this process is realizing like, what type of person are you in these friendships? Like, how much have you given already? Have you already given them a chance
Yeah.
to be better and they're just not taking it? And for me, when I have my friend breakups, that has almost always been the case where I've been like, we just keep doing this same dance where I need more from them. They say, oh my God, yes, totally. So sorry. Gonna give it to you. And then I just sit there waiting. I've had that happen, I would say, in all of my friendship breakups, I think, for the most part, unless that I ended anyway. And it's such a toxic dynamic. It's so
Yeah.
horrible.